Hello, in this video I'm going to be looking at the GSOR 1008. So this tank was in the last round of auctions, so I thought I would cover it. It's a tier 8 British auto-loading turreted tank destroyer with HESH, and the only other tank in the game that is even remotely similar is the tier 8 hybrid nation tank destroyer with a turret and HESH, the Death Star. However, these two tanks are still only somewhat comparable just because of how their guns work in completely different ways. But yeah, basically this tank is extremely unique. It's very hard to compare to other vehicles, and in terms of its gameplay style, there are none which are really too similar to this tank in the game. But let's get into its stats. Of course, there is a review on my website which I have updated recently, and you can check that out if you don't want this commentary. So looking at its armor is very weak, however it's not easily HE'd, and you can see that here. So frontal protection on the upper plate is between 125 to 140, but you can see on the upper plate it is an auto ricochet angle for all guns which are 123mm or smaller, and that is very important because in tier 8 you have a lot of guns which are 122mm, so the only guns that can actually overmatch you are tanks such as the Kari or the Chimera with 127mm guns or larger guns than that. The base upper plate is 88 to 92mm, that is low penetration, and the turret front is 50 to 80mm, also poor penetration, poor armor. However, note how small the turret front area is. It is actually quite hard for enemies to successfully penetrate HE on this tank, and you'll see that the side skirts are not see-through, so they are actually spaced armor, and I'll show that here. So this entire area on the side of the GSOR is 5mm of spaced armor, which means enemies can only shoot this area at the back of the hull over here. You can see it highlighted in green. They can't shoot anywhere else on the hull and penetrate it with HE, which is actually extremely good for its protection against HE and HESH shells. If you're facing, for example, a GSOR, you can just turn the hull sideways and hope for them to bounce. Otherwise they'll go right through your front with HESH. But switching to the HE view, you can see what I mean about penetrating the front of the turret using HE. While it may look like, oh, that's an easy shot, the GSOR's turret actually isn't that large. It's quite small, and especially when the vehicle is moving as well, it's quite hard to successfully penetrate HE on the front of the GSOR's turret, unless you're face-hugging them, for example. And you can also see the lower plate has quite good protection, this being 61mm HE. Most HE shells you face will have less penetration than this, so you only have to really watch out for 152mm guns which have around 80 to 90mm of HE penetration, and of course HESH. But overall armor for the GSOR is pretty bad, but at least its protection against HE and HESH isn't terrible. So let's get into the gun stats. This tank mounts a 107mm L7, which is that famous British gun with HESH. So it has three types of ammo, which are fairly important to cover. AP with 350 alpha, with this tank having a 2-shell magazine. That means it can burst out 700 damage in 2.5 seconds, so the alpha damage burst is pretty nice. Penetration 248 is pretty good, but it's nothing too amazing for tier 8, but with calibrated shells it does go up to a very nice level, which is slightly better than most tier 8's premium ammo. DPM is pretty decent for an autoloader, however, in the scope of all tier 8 tanks, this DPM is nothing impressive. In fact, it's quite low, especially for only having 350 alpha, but again, this tank has an autoloader, so kind of an unfair comparison. Shell velocity is a great 1066 meters per second. So Hesh, this is the really special bit of the tank. 440 alpha, which means 2.5 seconds. It can do 880 damage, which is massive damage considering how fast you're able to unload your shells. If you compare this to other tanks in tier 8, for example, let's get the Scepter or M3Yo, which have fairly good 105mm autoloaders. They do a burst damage of 930, but they take 5.5 seconds to unload. This one is just doing slightly less damage at 880, but is unloading twice as fast. So it is very, very good, dangerous burst damage. Penetration on Hesh is decent, but it's not amazing. This is fairly just normal penetration for Hesh in tier 8. And its DPM is great, both with calibrated shells or vents. And amazing shell velocity, which is 1,400 meters per second. It means you basically don't need to lead at all, and this is amazing considering this shell is Hesh. It means it's very easy to hit shots on moving targets, which generally Hesh kind of struggles to do. And HE, which is basically the same as Hesh. It just has much worse penetration at 53, much worse shell velocity at 1066 meters per second. There's basically no point using HE, just because its stats are flat out worse than the Hesh shell, and if you're struggling for credits and you want to use that HE, I would recommend you just don't play the GSOR 1008, because it is all about the Hesh really. So reload time is pretty quick, 14 seconds with vents or 14.5 with calibrated shells. With this tank, it's not a case of just, oh, calibrated shells is the much better equipment choice because this tank uses Hesh. It's not the case with this tank. I'll get into it with the equipment. Intraclip 2.5 seconds, pretty fast. It is very nice for 880 burst with the Hesh. Aim time is great, 3.2/3.4, and that is due to this great base aim time of 1.71 seconds. However, that aim time is balanced out by this horrible gun handling of 0.3, 0.3, 0.1, and quite mediocre dispersion of 0.335, which generally tanks with 0.335 in tier 8 are having around 400 alpha, maybe even more. So absolutely not impressive dispersion or gun handling for this tank. And 8.5 degrees of gun depression, which is pretty nice. The half degree extra does make actually a bit of a difference. So basically this gun, other than its burst damage and its pretty fast intraclip with great DPM on Hesh, it's not all that impressive in its other stats. While the aim time is great, it's balanced out by terrible gun handling, which makes it feel like its accuracy is okay but not great, and its dispersion is also fairly unimpressive. On top of this, you also have to remember you don't have a high penetration heat or APCR shell, which means your penetration potential is less than other tanks, so you would struggle to go through the front of an E75, which is hiding its lower plate. But that is the trade-off for having that Hesh shell. But next, well, overall the gun, it's pretty good. You do have to equip it right. If you equip it right, this gun can be amazing. But next, mobility. Top speed, or 49 kilometers, that's pretty good. However, you don't reach that very often. 17 in reverse, again, that's pretty good, pretty nice for a tank destroyer. And traverse speed is 40.8, again, it's pretty good. But considering that this tank doesn't have much armor at all, that's not all that impressive. Same thing for medium terrain traverse. It's decent, but because this tank doesn't have that much armor, it's not so impressive. And then the acceleration rate, 14.5, again, without much armor, that is not impressive. Overall, it's not bad, but for this tank's level of armor, it is not actually that good. And then, of course, with great terrain resistances, its actual acceleration is still 14.5 on hard terrain and 13.2 on medium. So this overall mobility profile is nothing impressive at all. You'll notice it in battle. it feels more like a slow medium tank or maybe a fast heavy. You do definitely need to rely on the speed boost consumable to be able to utilize your speed. So getting into consumables and equipment, definitely use double repair and engine power boost. If you wanted to just maximize on the speed, you could use the reduced engine power boost instead of the repair kit, but personally I wouldn't. And again, this is needed just to be able to utilize your mobility. Provisions are just normal because this tank has nothing special on provisions. Ammo, I would set it up like this, 24 of each HESH and AP, and not using any HE. Again, if you're going to struggle on credits, just don't play this tank, because it is mainly about the HESH. You definitely need to be using that in battle. So, equipment. Vents or calibrated shells, both are fairly valid on this tank, but vents especially compared to other autoloaders. The reason being, this tank's absolutely terrible gun handling of 0.3, 0.3, 0.1, which make its gun feel kind of unreliable for how low alpha damage it does on AP. So vents are really useful, not so much for the reload time or other stats, but mainly for improving the aim time and improving that dispersion, just because it will make this gun really very good in terms of its handling, compared to if you didn't use vents, and that difference is actually noticeable. And also remember, vents aren't just one improvement to one stat like calibrated shells is. You'll notice a big difference in penetration when using calibrated shells, but you won't notice as much of a difference with vents just because it's not improving one stat, it's improving a lot of stats in smaller ways. So it definitely does make a difference when all is combined for this vehicle. And I'll say, if you feel this tank is pretty derpy and not that reliable, vents could fix that. And if you do get this tank, I'd say the only way to choose which piece of equipment correctly is play 5 or 10 battles with vents, play 5 or 10 battles with calibrated shells, and see which one you like more, because it will be down to your preference. For me, I use vents. Calibrated shells are of course also very good just to have that amazing AP penetration and better HESH penetration, which is the main shell type that you use. But I have the vents just for that accuracy. Next, camouflage net, just because this tank has great camo rating and it is a sneaky sort of tank destroyer. If you did want to use optics, that sort of can work. It gives you heavy tank levels of view range, but it's absolutely not worth it considering you're a sneaky sniping tank destroyer. Next, engine accelerator. Again, this tank's mobility isn't impressive. This is absolutely more important than having traverse speed. And then improved assembly, just because this tank no armor at all and its HP is quite low for a tank destroyer in tier 8. Gun lane drive, again, due to amazing shell velocity on both AP and HESH, you should be maximizing on the tank's great aim time, which is exactly what gun lane drive does. And also, because this tank has such bad on-move dispersion, this is absolutely mandatory just to improve how fast you can aim in on the enemies. Now, the last choice is either vertical stabilizer or refined gun. Vertical stabilizer can work, however, this tank's gun handling is so bad that regardless of if you use vertical stabilizer or not, you must stop to aim. And if you're going to stop to aim, you may as well have better dispersion, which is what refined gun does. And with refined gun, you have really amazing dispersion of 0.275 or 0.285 if you don't use vents. So, vertical stabilizer, while it does help, just because this tank's dispersion is fairly unimpressive, 0.335, I would say go with refined gun. Because you have to stop to aim the gun fully anyway, then what's the point of using vertical stabilizer? You're fully aiming, may as well have better dispersion. And then the last two, of course, just the usual choice. So let's get into the gameplay of the GSOR. I've got two battles in this tank. One battle is with calibrated shells, one battle is with vents. This battle on mines is with calibrated shells, and just to note, these replays are not to show one equipment is better than the other, it's just to show the sort of differences you get with each equipment piece. So on this battle I'm going to go into the usual tank destroyer position on mines, up at this hill. Unfortunately 3 of my tanks are AFK and the Emil one wants to sit in spawn and snipe. So yeah, battle is going great so far. T49 has made it on the hill, and unfortunately I get a bit unlucky and the shot goes into the T49's viewport. And there, the Tiger 2, his side armor is showing, but again I get a bit unlucky and I shoot his tracks. Now, if I had been using vents, I might have hit those shots a bit more reliably just because of the better dispersion. But of course there's no way to tell if that would happen. Now these two shots on the IS-8 are just bad by me. He's behind a wall, I shot Hesh at his turret, which I obviously can't do anything against, and then I shot the AP on his tracks. So just bad shots against the IS-8. However, now my team is being pushed in the town and I can't do much just because I am a sniping tank destroyer. So I decided to use the AP against the Emil 1 here, and you can see how little armor he has against this almost 270mm of AP penetration. And that Emil 1 is now gone. I could have used Hesh on his lower plate, but at that kind of a range I felt it was more important to actually penetrate the shot rather than hit a bit of extra damage and potentially bounce. Also, another thing to note, if I had slightly better accuracy I might have tried Hesh, but then I wouldn't have had the penetration on AP to as easily penetrate through the Emil's entire tank front. And there you can see the great thing about the GSOR, the 2-shell autoloader allowing me to put in quite a lot of damage on that Object 274A. So now, with the WZ off to the side, I'm deciding to go for him with Hesh. Luckily I do manage to hit, and then the second shell I'll just use AP for, as I didn't want to take that shot, but unfortunately I was a bit slow to pull back. But here I'm going to go for the WZ once again, and I do manage to kill him. In that situation, the penetration of the tank without calibrated shells would have been more than enough to go through the front of that WZ, just because he was below me and his armor relies heavily on angling, just like the Emil 1. But now, with me being the only one on the flank behind the enemies, I'm going to try and get rid of the Foch or deal with the Tiger. Unfortunately, I had to rush that shot a bit just to try and get it in before he turned the hull, and making it non-Hesh penetrable, which means it does miss and only do 130 something damage. Also, that Tiger 2, good situational awareness because he did turn around immediately, and that is actually very annoying for me in this battle. You'll see later. But now, again, I don't want to leave this position just because I'm putting pressure on the Foch. However, unfortunately, I get hit by the Tiger 2 who manages to reverse. And now, seeing him rush down like that, I decide I'm going to leave just because he's probably going to push the hill. Or at least try to go up to the back and then kill me from there. But now with the IS-8 off to the side, I'm going to use Hesh on his rear. 444 damage, and then another one AP for 306. So you can see how that magazine is very nice. Even if you can't penetrate 2 Hesh shells, with 2 AP shells you're still doing a very significant 700 damage. So the IS-8 has gone distracted again, allowing me to put in another Hesh shell into his rear. But you can see for this situation, the extra penetration on my Hesh hasn't done anything really. I didn't need it for the back of the IS-8, the Tiger 2 turned so I couldn't penetrate it on his side, and my accuracy wasn't good enough to snap it in before he turned. So my Hesh hasn't done too much in this battle really, the extra 14mm of penetration. Also on that WZ-120-1 FT, I didn't need the extra penetration to deal with him. Both my AP and my Hesh could have easily penetrated both those shots without calibrated shells. So again, while calibrated shells is very good, a lot of the situations you just won't need that penetration. There you can see that Tiger 2 with his good situational awareness does manage to kill me, and unfortunately because this tank has horrible on-move dispersion, I wasn't able to snap in a shot there. But 4,500 damage is a very nice result for tier 8. I somehow managed to block one shot, but again, this tank not reliable armor, so that was just pure luck. And even with using Hesh in that battle, I did manage to make 143,000 credits, but that is due to the first class and the high caliber giving some extra credits. But next, the battle with Vents, and this is on Port Bay. So once again, these two battles with the different equipment are not to show Vents is better or calibrated shells is better. They're just showing the differences in the equipment and sort of the kind of impact they have on your gun. And that impact is very important with Vents, helping improve this tank's pretty mediocre dispersion and pretty horrible on-move handling. And then calibrated shells being very useful for going through very strongly armoured enemies with that 270 AP almost. But here you can see I'm playing pretty aggressively on Port Bay, and that is because my heavy tanks are not coming to this side, and I'm expecting I'll be able to set up some ambush shots on enemy heavies when they cross. But not seeing that happen, I decide to come forward. So there's a T-54E2, easily able to track him in place and then get in a nice Hesh shot on his lower plate. In that situation, again, calibrated shells wouldn't have been needed just because of the angle he was at. I would have only been able to use AP. But reloaded and now ready to deal with him. Again using the Hesh, which allows me to roll a very nice 454 and kill him in one shot. So again, very nice damage on the Hesh for this tank, and even if I hadn't managed to kill him in one shot, I would have had another shot ready to go. But here the M6, I do unfortunately min roll on Hesh, doing only 330 and then low rolling with 413, so not a great magazine there. Again, the min roll for this gun is 330, the max roll is 440. Sorry, 550, not 440. 440 is the average. And then again, once again, reloaded fairly quickly with this tank's pretty nice magazine reload, and due to this tank's 2 shells, I'm able to get another shot into the 53 TP. So it's quite nice for being able to split the damage, unlike a high alpha tank, for example the Caliban, might do. So with the defender off to the side, I know he's got no spaced armor on the side armor, so I can just very easily penetrate Hesh, and then just to make sure I don't hit his tracks, I use AP for the second shot. But unfortunately here it doesn't look like we're going to win the battle, just because our ISU is about to die and they have some heavy tanks left, well, heavily armoured tank destroyers and a heavy tank, while we don't have any. So we're at a slight disadvantage. I was trying to kill the SU there, but unfortunately the Jagdtiger drives right in front as I was aiming in, so I just go for the Jagdtiger. The object in this situation not making the best move, I would say. We need his support in the town as it's 2 versus 4 and he's gone to cap base A. But luckily, with 2 shells in the magazine, I was able to kill that Jagdtiger. And the ISU is on 360 hit points, so I can one-shot him with Hesh. So again, very nice to have that 440 Hesh alpha damage, and you get 2 chances with it, which is something very cool. Only this tank is really able to do that. unfortunately had to take both of those shots for the 53 TP, and the ISU could push me, but luckily he doesn't. So I push forward and try to get this last shell, and I get very lucky with that shot, basically on the move, and I do manage to snap it in. So that game, 6,000 damage, unfortunately it has crashed. So unfortunately the game crashed, but that game I did do 6,000 damage with Top Gun, Ace Medal and a high caliber, which does make us some extra credits, making 225,000 despite using so much Hesh ammo in that battle. And you can see how much damage I did compared to the rest of the team, but that's what happens when you get 6k. Now let me see very quickly how much was lost. Yeah, ammo resupply 40,000. So it does use up a lot of credits in the ammo cost, but that's what happens with a Hesh tank, especially one with 2 shell autoloader. So you could see sort of how this tank plays in those battles. It's a sort of sniper support vehicle, and it is very nice, very underrated on Tank Destroyer to have a turret, which allows you to set up shots, as you could see mainly in that second battle. But yeah, the GSOR 1008, it is a very nice vehicle. I would say the equipment changes, which happened last year, well, almost last year now, were very beneficial for this tank, just because of vents getting improved, the gun lane drive getting improved, and refined gun getting improved. Did make a very big difference for this tank's gun, and now, compared to before, it is a very reliable, very accurate gun. And yeah, GSOR 1008 is now a very nice vehicle. Before it was okay, it was situationally very good, but now it is just very nice due to how good its gun can be, of course with the right equipment. So yeah, very interesting, unique vehicle, and it is a good one. Is worth getting if you do like Hesh tanks and something a bit unique. But yeah, that is the GSOR 1008, and that's it. Thanks for watching.